The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Windermere Palace as Princess Catherine stood by the tall windows of the royal wing. Her trembling hands held the medical report that would change everything. The words seemed to blur together on the page, but the diagnosis was clear and devastating. Stage 4 cancer, advanced beyond treatment options. The doctors had given her husband, Prince Alexander, only weeks to live. Catherine had always been the strong one in their marriage. While Alexander dealt with the pressures of being heir to the throne, she managed their 3 young children and countless royal duties with grace. But now, facing the unthinkable, she felt her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The report slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor like a fallen leaf. Their love story had captured the world's attention 15 years ago. A commoner who caught the prince's eye at university, Catherine had transformed from a shy student into a beloved royal figure. Their wedding had been watched by 2 billion people across the globe. Their children had brought joy not just to them, but to an entire nation that had watched them grow from tiny babies into curious, energetic youngsters. Alexander entered the room quietly, his once strong frame now noticeably thinner after months of what they had told the public were routine medical procedures. His eyes, still the same brilliant blue that had made her fall in love with him all those years ago, were now shadowed with exhaustion and pain. Yet when he looked at her, they still sparkled with the same warmth and love. "The children don't know yet," Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible. Alexander crossed the room and took her in his arms, feeling how she shook against him. They had always protected their children from the harsh realities of royal life. But this was something they could not shield them from forever. "We'll tell them together," Alexander said softly, stroking her hair, "when the time is right." But they both knew that time was running out faster than either of them was prepared for. Outside their window, the palace gardens bloomed with spring flowers, a cruel reminder that life continued its cycle even as theirs was about to be forever changed. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier than it did in that moment. Soon, Alexander would have to make the most difficult decision of his life, whether to abdicate to spend his final days with his family or fulfill his duty to the throne until the very end. The entire kingdom, unaware of the tragedy unfolding behind palace walls, continued their daily lives, not knowing that their future king was fighting a battle he could not win. Catherine closed her eyes and tried to memorize this moment, the feeling of his arms around her, the sound of his heartbeat, the scent of his cologne mixed with the antiseptic smell from his recent hospital visits. These were the details she would need to carry with her for the rest of her life, long after he was gone. The sun continued to shine through the windows, but for Catherine and Alexander, the darkness was already beginning to fall. 3 weeks had passed since the devastating diagnosis, and keeping the secret was becoming impossible. Alexander's condition was deteriorating rapidly, though he fought to maintain his royal duties with remarkable determination. The palace staff had begun to notice his frequent absences and the worried expressions that Catherine could no longer hide behind her practiced smile. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, the royal physician, delivered the news they had been dreading. Alexander had days, perhaps a week at most. The aggressive cancer had spread throughout his body, and even the strongest pain medications were becoming less effective. It was time to tell the children and prepare the nation for what was coming. 10-year-old Prince James, 8-year-old Princess Sophia, and 6-year-old Prince Oliver sat on the familiar sofa in their private sitting room, the same place where they had shared countless bedtime stories and family conversations. Catherine's hands shook as she tried to find words that could possibly explain the unexplainable to such young hearts. "Daddy is very sick," she began, her voice catching despite her efforts to stay strong. Alexander, seated beside her, reached for her hand. "The doctors have tried everything they can, but sometimes, even with all the medicine in the world, people's bodies get too tired to keep fighting." Prince James, wise beyond his years, seemed to understand immediately. His face went pale and tears began to form in his eyes. "Is Daddy going to die?" he asked with the brutal honesty that only children possess. Princess Sophia began to cry softly, while little Prince Oliver looked confused, still too young to fully grasp what death meant. Alexander pulled all 3 children close to him, feeling the warmth of their small bodies against his increasingly frail frame. "I am going to a place where I won't hurt anymore," he explained gently. "But I need you to promise me something very important. I need you to take care of Mummy and take care of each other. Can you do that for me?" The children's tears came freely now, and Catherine felt her own composure finally breaking. The family held each other in a tight embrace, their sobs echoing through the room that had once been filled with laughter and joy. Outside, the spring rain began to fall against the windows, as if the sky itself was mourning with them. That evening, after the children had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from crying, Catherine and Alexander sat together in their bedroom. They talked about practical matters, the future of the monarchy, how Catherine would guide the children through their grief, the funeral arrangements that needed to be made. But mostly, they talked about their memories together. "Do you remember our first dance at the university ball?" Alexander asked, his voice weak but filled with love. Catherine smiled through her tears, remembering how nervous she had been, how he had stepped on her dress, how they had laughed until their sides hurt. "You were wearing that blue dress that matched your eyes," he continued. "I knew that night that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you. You did spend the rest of your life with me," Catherine whispered back, holding his hand tighter. "And I will spend the rest of mine loving you and honoring your memory." As the night grew deeper, they made plans for how to tell the nation. The palace would release a statement in the morning, and Catherine would address the people alongside the Queen. The world that had celebrated their love story would now have to witness its heartbreaking conclusion. The palace gates were surrounded by hundreds of people when the official statement was released at 9 o'clock in the morning. The carefully worded announcement revealed that Prince Alexander was in the final stages of terminal cancer, and that the royal family was requesting privacy during this difficult time. Within hours, the news had spread across every continent, and the outpouring of love and support was overwhelming. Flowers began appearing outside every royal residence. Messages of support poured in from world leaders, celebrities, and ordinary people whose lives had been touched by the royal couple's genuine warmth and dedication to charitable causes. The hashtag "The Prayers for Alexander" began trending worldwide, with millions sharing their favorite memories of the prince and princess. Inside the palace, Alexander was growing weaker by the hour. He had moved to a hospital bed in their private quarters. Surrounded by family photos and the children's artwork, the medical team worked quietly in the background, focused now on keeping him comfortable rather than fighting the inevitable. Catherine rarely left his side, sleeping in a chair next to his bed and holding his hand through the difficult moments when pain would wash over him in waves. She read to him from their favorite books, played their wedding song softly in the background, and whispered memories of their happiest times together. The children visited throughout the day, bringing him drawings and telling him about their lessons, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in an impossible situation. Queen Elizabeth, Alexander's mother, spent long hours at her son's bedside. The monarch, who had always been seen as stoic and reserved, was now just a mother watching her child suffer. She spoke to him about his father, who had passed away 5 years earlier, and about the pride she felt in the man he had become. "You have been the best son, the best husband, and the best father," she told him through her tears. "Your legacy will live on through your children and through all the lives you have touched." The Prime Minister arrived for what everyone knew would be Alexander's final official meeting. Too weak to sit up, Alexander signed the documents that would ensure a smooth transition of his duties to his brother, Prince Michael, who would serve as regent until young Prince James came of age. The act of signing took tremendous effort, but Alexander was determined to fulfill his responsibilities to the very end. As evening approached, Alexander's breathing became more labored. The doctors quietly informed Catherine that it would likely be his last night. She climbed into the narrow hospital bed beside him, something she had done every night since he had become bedridden. They lay together in the dim light, her head on his shoulder, both of them knowing that their time was measured in hours now. "I'm scared," Catherine whispered, the first time she had allowed herself to voice her fear. "I don't know how to do this without you." Alexander used what little strength he had left to stroke her hair. "You are the strongest person I know," he said, his voice barely audible. "Our children will need that strength. The country will need that strength. And I will be watching over all of you, every single day." Through the window, they could see the crowds of people keeping vigil outside the palace gates, many holding candles and flowers. Strangers had become united in their grief, supporting each other as they waited for news. The love that Alexander and Catherine had shared had somehow spread beyond the palace walls, touching hearts around the world and creating a sense of global community in the face of tragedy. Dawn was breaking over the palace when Alexander's breathing became so shallow that Catherine feared each breath might be his last. The children had been brought in during the early morning hours, still in their pajamas, to say their final goodbyes. Prince James, trying to be brave for his younger siblings, whispered promises to his father about taking care of the family and being a good big brother. Princess Sophia, clutching her favorite teddy bear, placed it gently on her father's chest. "So you won't be lonely," she said through her tears. Little Prince Oliver, still not fully understanding what was happening, simply laid his small hand on his father's face and said, "I love you, Daddy," with the pure innocence that only a child possesses. Queen Elizabeth stood at the foot of the bed, her usual composure finally cracking as she watched her son struggle for each breath. The Archbishop of Canterbury had arrived to offer final prayers and comfort to the family. The room was filled with the soft murmur of whispered words, gentle tears, and the steady beeping of the monitors that were tracking Alexander's failing vital signs. Catherine pressed her face close to Alexander's ear and began to speak in the softest voice. She told him about their first meeting at university, when he had accidentally spilled coffee on her textbooks and spent an hour helping her dry the pages. She reminded him of their secret dates when he was trying to court her away from the paparazzi's attention, and how they used to sneak out of the palace for fish and chips at a tiny shop in the village. She spoke of their wedding day, how handsome he had looked waiting for her at the altar, and how her hands had shaken so badly that he had to steady them during the ring exchange. She reminded him of the births of their children, how he had cried harder than she had when each baby was placed in his arms, and how he used to spend hours just watching them sleep. "Remember when James took his first steps?" she whispered. "He walked straight to you and you scooped him up and spun him around until we were all dizzy with laughter. And Sophia's first word was Dada, and you were so proud you called everyone we knew to tell them. And Oliver, our little surprise, who made our family complete." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Alexander's eyes fluttered open one last time. He looked at Catherine with such love and tenderness that it took her breath away. "Thank you," he mouthed silently, "for the most beautiful life." She squeezed his hand and whispered back, "Thank you for choosing me to share it with you." At 11:47 in the morning, with his beloved wife holding his hand and his children gathered around him, Prince Alexander drew his final breath. The monitors fell silent, and in that moment, the room seemed to fill with an overwhelming sense of peace. The struggle was over and he was finally free from pain. Catherine leaned down and kissed his forehead one last time, her tears falling like rain onto his still face. "Sleep well, my love," she whispered. "Until we meet again." The children clung to their mother, all of them crying together as they said goodbye to the man who had been the center of their world. Outside, the palace flags were slowly lowered to half-mast, and within minutes the news had spread around the globe. Church bells began to toll across the kingdom, and in cities worldwide, people stopped what they were doing to observe moments of silence. Social media was flooded with tributes, photos, and memories as millions of people shared in the family's grief. The prince, who had lived his life in service to others, had touched hearts far beyond the borders of his own country, and his passing was mourned by people of all ages, backgrounds, and nationalities. The world watched as Catherine emerged from the palace 3 hours after Alexander's passing, her face pale but composed, her children beside her. Dressed in black, she walked slowly to the waiting microphones where hundreds of journalists and thousands of mourners had gathered. The silence was deafening as she prepared to address the nation and the world. "Today, we lost not just a prince but a devoted husband, a loving father, and a man who dedicated his life to serving others," Catherine began, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to fall. Alexander faced his illness with the same courage and dignity that he brought to every aspect of his life. He died peacefully, surrounded by love, and his final thoughts were of gratitude for the life we shared together and the privilege of serving this great nation. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces before her, many of them streaked with tears. "He asked me to tell you that your love and support gave him strength during his final weeks. He was deeply moved by every flower, every card, every prayer, and every kind word. You reminded him that love is the most powerful force in the world, and that love will continue to guide us forward. The crowd was completely silent except for the soft sounds of crying. Catherine continued, "Our children and I will carry his memory in our hearts forever. We will honor his legacy by continuing the work that meant so much to him, supporting those in need, bringing people together, and working for a better world for our children and generations to come." As she finished speaking, Catherine stepped back from the microphones and took her children's hands. Together, they walked slowly toward the palace gates where thousands of flowers had been laid by mourners from around the world. The sight was overwhelming: roses, lilies, daisies, and handmade bouquets stretched as far as the eye could see, creating a carpet of color and fragrance that served as a testament to the love people felt for their prince. Inside the palace, preparations for the funeral were already underway. Alexander had left detailed instructions about what he wanted: a ceremony that would celebrate his life rather than simply mourn his death. He had chosen readings from poets who had inspired him, music that had meaning for their family, and speakers who represented the charities and causes he had championed throughout his life. World leaders began arriving within hours of the announcement. Presidents, prime ministers, and royalty from every continent came to pay their respects. The guest list read like a who's who of global leadership, but also included ordinary people whose lives had been touched by Alexander's charitable work. Children he had mentored, veterans he had supported, and families he had helped through difficult times. Catherine spent the evening going through Alexander's personal effects, preparing items for the children to keep as mementos of their father. She found letters he had written to each child for important milestones in their futures: graduations, weddings, the births of their own children. In each letter, he had written about his love for them and his hopes for their futures. There was also a letter for Catherine, sealed and marked, to be opened on our 20th wedding anniversary. With shaking hands, she broke the seal and read his words: "My dearest Catherine, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, but our love remains. Thank you for 20 years of pure happiness. You made me a better man, a better father, and a better prince. Please don't grieve for too long. The world needs your light, and our children need your strength. Find joy again, find love again if it finds you. I will always be grateful that I got to love you and be loved by you, until we dance again, my beautiful wife." That night, as Catherine tucked her children into bed, little Prince Oliver asked, "Mummy, where is Daddy now?" Catherine sat on the edge of his bed and pointed out the window at the brightest star in the sky. "He's watching over us from up there," she said softly. "And every time you see that star, you'll know that Daddy is sending you his love." All three children pressed their faces to the window, and for the first time since their father's death, they smiled through their tears. The day of the funeral dawned clear and bright, as if the heavens themselves wanted to honor Prince Alexander's memory. Westminster Abbey had been transformed into a garden of white flowers, exactly as he had requested. 2 billion people around the world watched as the golden carriage carried his coffin through the streets of London, followed by Catherine and the children, Queen Elizabeth, and dignitaries from every corner of the globe. The sight that moved people most was Catherine walking behind the coffin, her head held high despite her obvious grief, with Prince James on one side and Princess Sophia and Prince Oliver on the other. The children, dressed in their formal black clothing, walked with remarkable composure for their young ages, their strength clearly inherited from both their parents. The service itself was a celebration of a life well lived. Instead of focusing solely on mourning, speakers shared stories of Alexander's humor, his kindness, and his unwavering commitment to making the world a better place. Children from schools he had supported sang his favorite hymn. Veterans he had helped spoke about his genuine care for their struggles. Scientists from environmental charities he had championed discussed how his support had led to breakthrough research. When it came time for Catherine to speak, she walked to the podium with steady steps. "Alexander often said that love multiplies when it is shared," she began, her clear voice carrying throughout the Abbey and across the airwaves to billions of listeners. "Today I see the truth of those words. The love we shared as a family has grown and spread to touch hearts around the world. Your presence here, your prayers, your kindness, all of this is Alexander's love continuing to live and grow." She looked directly at her children as she continued. "James, Sophia, and Oliver, Your father's greatest wish was that you would grow up knowing how deeply you are loved. That love doesn't end with death. It becomes part of who you are, and it will guide you through every day of your lives. When you help someone in need, when you show kindness to a stranger, when you stand up for what is right, your father's love is working through you. As the service concluded with Alexander's favorite piece of music, something magical happened. Thousands of white doves were released outside the abbey, filling the sky with wings and hope. Children in the crowd began to clap, and soon the entire gathering was applauding, not in grief, but in celebration of a life that had touched so many hearts. The private burial was held at the royal estate, where Alexander was laid to rest in the garden he had loved so much. Only family and closest friends were present for this final goodbye. Catherine placed a single white rose on the coffin, and each of the children added their own flowers. "We'll visit you every day, Daddy," little Sophia whispered, and Catherine knew they would keep that promise. In the months that followed, Catherine channeled her grief into continuing Alexander's work. She established the Prince Alexander Foundation, focusing on the causes that had been closest to his heart. The children returned to school and slowly began to heal, supported by counseling and the love of family and friends. Catherine often found them talking to their father's photo, sharing their daily adventures and asking for his guidance. A year later, on the anniversary of Alexander's death, Catherine stood again at the palace gates, this time to unveil a statue in his honor. Thousands of people had gathered, many of them the same faces who had mourned with them a year before. Alexander believed that love never dies, it simply transforms, she said. Today I see his love transformed into kindness between strangers, generosity toward those in need, and hope for a better tomorrow. As she pulled away the cloth covering the statue, gasps of wonder rose from the crowd. The bronze figure showed Alexander not in his formal royal regalia, but as he preferred to be remembered, in simple clothing with his arms outstretched in welcome, his face wearing the warm smile that had captured hearts around the world. That evening, Catherine sat in the garden with her children, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Prince James, now 11 and growing more like his father every day, put his arm around his mother's shoulders. "Mummy, do you think Daddy can see us?" he asked. Catherine looked up at the star that had become their special connection to Alexander, shining brightly in the darkening sky. "I know he can, sweetheart. And I know he's proud of the strong, kind, loving people you're all becoming." The tears that fell that night were different from those that had come before. They were still tears of missing him, but they were also tears of gratitude for the love they had shared, the memories they would always carry, and the knowledge that love, once given freely, never truly ends. It simply becomes part of the story we tell about what it means to live a life worth remembering.